They thought the problem was mechanical. For months, Ferrari's engineering team had framed the SF25 as inherently flawed: unstable rear end, unpredictable brake balance, and rear tires that overheat just by existing. But that story started to unravel on lap 27 at Monza. Hamilton's steering trace up until that point looked ordinary. Then, through Lesmo 2, something changed. His minimum speed was 2 km/h faster than both McLaren's. Not dramatic at first glance, but inside Ferrari's telemetry center, the effect was immediate. A freeze, quiet, engineers staring at a data line that didn't belong, no corrections, no steering oscillations, just a perfect arc through a corner the SF25 had chewed up all season. This wasn't just a fast lap, it was clinical, clean, almost robotic in its precision. And that's when the realization hit. Hamilton wasn't surviving the car, he was unlocking it. And if that was true, then everything Ferrari thought they understood about their own machine was wrong. Let's be clear, Hamilton didn't win the race. He didn't even make the podium. P6, 37 seconds behind Verstappen. But Ferrari's engineers weren't watching the stopwatch, they were watching behavior. The SF25, infamous for its rear instability and thermal chaos, had suddenly found calm in the hands of one driver. Hamilton's steering input through corners was one continuous motion. No micro-corrections, no panic lifts. At Lesmo 2, his throttle trace showed a smooth, uninterrupted curve. The rear tire delta, stable within a 5 degrees Celsius window. Compare that to Leclerc's 12 degrees thermal swings and you see the real issue. This wasn't setup, it was style. Leclerc attacked the car, and it bit back. Hamilton? He let it breathe, and that's the part that shook Ferrari to its core. Because if one driver could neutralize the chaos simply by adapting, then the SF25 wasn't a flawed car. It was a misunderstood one, and someone, somewhere in Maranello, had just been exposed. When Ferrari pulled up Hamilton's setup sheets, the confusion turned into disbelief. He hadn't asked for stability, he hadn't dialed down the aggression. In fact, he'd gone the other way, requesting the most extreme differential settings Ferrari had on offer. Wider diff opening on entry, aggressive locking on exit, translated into racing terms. A car that wants to snap on turning and launch unpredictably on throttle. For most drivers, it's undriveable. For Hamilton, it was a tool. He didn't fight the chaos, he studied it. From Friday FP1, he used practice not to chase lap time, but to learn. Every rear step out, every slide, every twitch, he absorbed it. Slowly, what had been instability became instinct. By qualifying, he wasn't surviving the SF25, he was shaping it. While Leclerc needed a compliant platform to attack, Hamilton needed freedom to adapt. Ferrari gave him a ticking bomb. He turned it into a metronome, and that scared everyone, including his own engineers. Ferrari's engineers couldn't argue with the data. Through Variante della Roggia, Hamilton's steering was one clean arc. Leclerc, by contrast, showed jittery corrections, tiny left-right flicks that screamed of a driver constantly managing the rear. And the tyre data, even worse. Leclerc's rears ran hot and erratic, triggering thermal spikes every time he pushed. Hamilton's? Within 5 degrees Celsius lap after lap, like clockwork. No variance, no overheating. It wasn't just a difference in driving, it was a completely different car, in the same chassis. The shock deepened when Ferrari confirmed. No electronic overrides, no hidden traction control tricks, no brake migration tweaks. What Hamilton was doing was all raw feel. No simulations had predicted this, no engineer had modeled it. And suddenly, the question inside Maranello wasn't about setup anymore. It was about philosophy. Were they building the car for the wrong kind of driver all along? Ferrari's driver lineup is one of its biggest assets, on paper. But Monza exposed the tension beneath. Leclerc is precision incarnate, sharp, aggressive, surgical with inputs. His style demands a car that obeys instantly, one that offers stability at the limit. But that kind of setup requires compromises. Softer rear, conservative diffs, tamer rotation. Hamilton, on the other hand, thrives in unpredictability. He reads the car like a living organism, lets it move, twist, step out, and uses those signals to rotate it earlier, faster. What Ferrari saw at Monza wasn't just two styles, it was a philosophical fork in the road. Build around Leclerc, and you cage Hamilton's adaptability. Build around Hamilton, and Leclerc fights a car that won't obey his instincts. There is no hybrid solution. The SF25 behaves like two different machines, depending on who's driving it. That's not a setup dilemma. That's a strategic identity crisis, and Ferrari can't hide from it anymore. Inside Ferrari's trackside engineering unit, The reaction to Hamilton's data wasn't celebration, it was silence, because this wasn't just a fast stint, it dismantled half a season's worth of excuses. For months, Maranello's leadership pointed to rear instability, flawed aerobalance, and thermal degradation as structural defects. That narrative justified simulation overhauls, expensive upgrades, and cautious race strategies. But at Monza, Hamilton completed 53 laps without triggering a single one of those failure modes. The SF25, the car they'd all written off as fundamentally broken, suddenly looked composed, predictable, competitive, and that's when the real damage started. Engineers who had pushed for safe setups were now under scrutiny. Strategists who had blamed chassis flaws were forced to reassess. Hamilton hadn't just driven a good race, he'd shattered an internal consensus, and with every lap he made one thing painfully clear: maybe the problem was never the car. Maybe the problem was how they chose to understand it. By the time the checkered flag dropped, Ferrari's data wasn't just theirs anymore. Rival teams always get access, one way or another. McLaren's strategy group flagged it first. Hamilton's exit speeds were too consistent for a car labeled unstable. Red Bull's analysts in Milton Keynes noticed something else. Hamilton was rotating the SF25 earlier in mid-speed corners, a sign the chassis flex Ferrari had blamed all year might not be as limiting as they claimed. And then came the math. McLaren estimated Hamilton's 5 degrees Celsius rear delta versus Leclerc's 12 degrees Celsius could be worth up to 0.2 per lap over a long stint. Over a season, that's the kind of margin that decides constructors' titles. Ferrari, once seen as limping through 2025, suddenly looked like a sleeping threat, if and only if Hamilton's adaptation was real. And that scared the entire paddock, because now, unpredictability wasn't Ferrari's weakness, it was their weapon, and only one driver seemed to know how to wield it. What happened at Monza wasn't just a fast lap, it was a revelation. For half a season, Ferrari claimed the SF25 was broken, yet Hamilton proved it could be mastered. But now comes the real question: was it a one-off, or has he unlocked something permanent? Because next is Singapore, brutal heat, relentless corners, rear tire torture. If there's a place to expose a fragile chassis, it's Marina Bay. And yet, if Hamilton's Monza performance wasn't a fluke, Singapore could flip the narrative. Every track Ferrari feared, Suzuka, Austin, Qatar, suddenly becomes opportunity. But that depends on one thing: who Ferrari chooses to evolve around. Hamilton's driving suggests a new frontier for the SF25. Leclerc's approach demands security and structure. There's no middle path anymore. And the risk? Pick the wrong philosophy, and Ferrari doesn't just lose a title. They lose the driver who might have redefined what this car is truly capable of. The countdown to truth begins under the lights of Singapore. Behind closed doors at Maranello, the tone has shifted. Publicly, it's all unity and progress. But internally, there's friction. Multiple sources close to the engineering department confirm post-Monza debriefs turned heated. Not about lap times, but about belief. Some senior figures who pushed the car is flawed narrative now find themselves isolated. Others, those who warned that the issue might be driver dependent, are suddenly being heard. And then there's the Hamilton factor. He hasn't demanded a car built around him, yet. But the paddock knows how this works. You don't sign a 7-time world champion just to treat him as an equal voice. You sign him to lead. The next upgrade package, rumored for Suzuka, will quietly signal who Ferrari is listening to. And if that upgrade leans toward mechanical grip, sharper rotation, and a stiffer rear, then the answer is clear. They're betting on Hamilton. And Leclerc, well, he might be left questioning if Ferrari still sees him as the future or just the past.